I remember her looking at us and just saying, guys, I am so sorry.
There's no heartbeat.
There's no
There's no
heartbeat.
movement.
There's
Were her
no
words.
movement.
Yeah. Around that, several hours, just worshiping the Lord and declaring resurrection life over our son.
Our son, Ezekiel, Christian, right, entered the arms of Jesus 9 years ago when I was 38 weeks pregnant.
So our story begins for Leslie and I. Our relationship started in our teenage years. I was 14 and she was 16, and she saw me.
Yes,
and
I'm older.
You are a little older. She saw me and she knew from that moment I was the one that she was going to marry. I'm kidding. That is not at all how it happened. More the opposite of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I pursued you and expressed my interest in you, and I was young and you were young, and we began our friendship and really became best friends, and feelings began to form, and neither one of us were allowed to date, and so we just spent a lot of time in each other's homes around our family and friends, and we just...
He said he was my brother's best friend and became best friends with my brother, and that's how it actually was us becoming best friends.
I may have had some ulterior motives.
Very much.
But it worked out, and here we are, almost 19 years of marriage later.
Yes.
And but at any rate, yes, we really fell in love in our teenage years, and we went to college together and were engaged halfway through our freshman year, and we got married that summer. And then in the winter of 2011, we both felt the Lord shifting our hearts back home, where we both grew up, in the church that we both grew up in. And her dad was the pastor there, and my family had been attending for many years. And so we moved back home in March of 2011. We had a plan that after we were married, because we were so young, I was 19 and Leslie was 21 when we were married. And so the plan was to wait a few years to start having babies. And our plan was 5 years. And the Lord incredibly honored that plan. And it was 5 years that we had our first daughter, Natalie. And we had her name from
Our honeymoon.
Our honeymoon. We decided on that name. And so it was almost 6 years that we had been married when she was born.
Yeah.
And so, yes, Natalie, and I always wanted a girl. And I'm a girl dad. I love being a girl dad. And so we had our first daughter, Natalie, in 2012. And then we had another girl. And our Brielle, she was born not quite 2 years later. And it was an intense birth for us. You want to talk about
we
that?
went in anticipating just like what happened with Natalie, just a normal delivery. And they had given me my epidural because I was not about to try and do it naturally. Kudos to every mom that does. You're amazing.
You experienced it for a little bit with Natalie.
I did, but they went ahead and gave me my epidural, and I just had this feeling in the pit of my stomach that something wasn't right. And we called the nurses in, and I felt like I couldn't breathe, and I was just like, something's wrong. And they were watching the monitors. Brielle was, her heart rate was 160s. She looked strong, and then they were like, "You're fine, everything's fine." And they put oxygen on me, and I just felt something in my heart, like something's not right. And all of a sudden, Brielle's heart rate dropped from 160s to 40s, and it was not good. Yeah. And everything started kind of going crazy. and they were pulling all the stuff off of me, and we're going into emergency surgery. We got to get this baby out. Yeah, not what we were expecting, because I had an epidural with Natalie. Everything went fine with her. I took a nap and I was dilated to 10, and here she comes. And Brielle was different, and they were whisking me into the OR. They left Travis standing in the room by himself. He had to sign all these papers super fast, basically signing my life into the hands of the doctors and the life of the baby into the hands of the doctors. And I remember them lifting me from my bed to the operating table, and they had to put me to sleep because it had to happen right now. They had to get her out. And I remember grabbing my belly and just saying, Jesus, take care of my baby. Because they were essentially anticipating losing her in that process. And so they put me to sleep, and before they even had me all the way asleep, they were cutting me open. The next thing I know, I wake up in the recovery room holding they brought her into us, a bright pink, sweet little baby girl. We had chosen her name. She was born at Christmas time, and we had chosen her name, Brielle, from a song. And joy, because it's Christmas. And when they were in the OR and they were delivering her, when she came out, she started to scream, like just cry, and turn bright red. And the nurse literally said, everyone in the OR rejoiced and shouted for joy. And so I remember the days after Brielle was born, just doing things a little different, just holding things a little closer with Natalie, with Brielle. And I found an author named Ann Voskamp in this process. And Ann wrote a book called 1,000 Gifts. And I will tell you, again, God placing things in our hands and our hearts and in our minds just at the right time. Ann taught through this book on gratitude and how to give thanks through the hardest of circumstances. And I remember after Brielle, I felt nothing but gratitude to the Lord and to the doctors, and just the fact that she was in our arms. Never thought that we would go through the loss of a baby. And so the reality that could have happened was just, it was intense.
Reset the tone of our lives.
It did.
From that point on.
Yeah.
Of course, 2 girls now. And which was amazing. And of course, the question that kept coming to us following Brielle's birth and throughout her, first few months of childhood, babyhood, was, all right, do you want a boy? Are you wanting a boy? And that has never been something that I felt I have to have a son to carry on the family name. And that I knew I wanted a daughter, and a son would be great, but Brielle was never a disappointment because she wasn't a boy.
Yeah.
And I really didn't care. A boy or a girl would be happy.
Yeah.
Either way. And so a little over a year after Brielle was born, then we became pregnant again, about a year and a half then, with a baby boy. And of course we were ecstatic and very excited, and so we started getting boy stuff and boy clothes and boy toys, and the theme of his room was a nautical theme, and so the navy blues, and it was a really neat experience. And we were third baby, so not our first rodeo in doing any of this. So his name was not a spiritual choice. It really wasn't. It was not. We love Ezekiel. We love Zeke, and we were watching a show called Parenthood, yes. And the grandfather in the show's name's Zeke, and we're like, well, what is that short for? And then, of course, throughout the show, you hear Ezekiel. And we're like, oh, I really like that name. And so it wasn't because Ezekiel is in the Bible, and Yeah, you would think being pastors, there was more of a spiritual significance to the name, and everyone probably thought that, but us knowing it was based off of a TV show.
Yeah. We chose Ezekiel, and Christian, because you like Christian Stanfill, we spelled it Kristian for something different, Ezekiel Christian.
Yep.
And we didn't really think too much about the meaning of his name before. My pregnancy went along normal. Yep. Everything was healthy. I was doing well. He was growing perfectly. Every pregnancy I had gestational diabetes, so they were always watching his growth, and I had extra ultrasounds, and everything was progressing beautifully. And we were getting close to the end. So we went to bed that night, and around 1 a.m. I woke up in pain. And I thought, oh goodness, I'm going into labor. And I had had a C-section with Brielle, so I really didn't want to go into full-blown labor if I could avoid it. Just not being a big fan of pain. We went through the night, and I remember okay, the baby's coming. We're ready. The baby's coming. Yeah. And we made a quick chiropractor appointment. I called my doctor, and she's like, you need to come into the hospital. We'll get you checked out and see what we're gonna do, because we'll probably deliver the baby today. So we had a scheduled C-section for October 7th, and this was October 1st. Yeah. And so we were like, okay, cool. So I went and got, we were not in any way alarmed or concerned at all. We just got up and started preparing and got to the hospital, and they started hooking me up to all the monitors, just like normal procedure. Experienced it multiple times every week. I had to go for NSTs, and but it was going so well with his pregnancy that my doctor was super just confident. And our doctor was amazing. She's walked with us through the fire, and all of our babies, same doctor. And so she was not at the hospital when we got there. We got all hooked up to the monitors, and they were just, wanting to see how far along I had progressed, if I was in active labor. And they put the bands around your belly to see what your contractions are doing, and they start putting the bands around and searching for a heartbeat, because one band is for contractions and one band is for the heartbeat. Yeah. And as we were sitting there, he was getting all comfy on the couch, just doing the dad thing, and the nurse is hooking me up to the monitor and searching for the heartbeat, and it was taking a little extra time, which sometimes babies play hide and seek, so it was not alarming until she just guys, I'm really struggling to find the heartbeat, and I'm gonna call the doctor. Yeah. And
there were several nurses that came in and was trying to find it, and they always are so reassuring and just keeping the situation calm. And they've done this so many times, but we began to notice the subtle glances between the nurses, and they started to realize something's not right. And
they had called her Dr. Barber in, and we were waiting for her to come. Yeah. And that's when we knew, when they called her, something's
really began to
off,
sit in.
And when she came in, they brought an portable ultrasound machine into the room, and they started to look for his heart. And I remember her looking at us and just saying, guys, I am so sorry.
There's no heartbeat.
There's no heartbeat.
There's no movement.
There's
her
no
words.
movement. Yeah. And I remember, you can help me because you remember details better. I just remember crying no loudly, and just crying out to God and praying. And we had experienced and heard wild testimonies just that week. Yeah. And so we had called Tommy Miller at that point, and we had not told our families what was happening. They knew we were at the hospital and that we were having the baby, but we had not called our families at that point. And we called Tommy, and when she came in and she told us this, I remember he was sitting at the foot of the bed up against the wall with us, just worshiping and praying and just being there and present. What we quickly realized was like, they start walking us through how they're going to have to deliver him, and that there's nothing they can do. And they asked like when I noticed the movement stopped. I didn't. It was not something that I could say, oh, at 1 a.m. the movement stopped. I just, because he got still around then anyway. And
with the busyness of the morning, never
noticed.
Really realized there wasn't any movement.
Yeah.
And
so they said that there were C-sections scheduled, and because we weren't necessarily an emergency, it was going to be hours before we could have the OR and the baby could be born. And we were like, that's okay. We're going to pray.
So we called our families.
Yeah.
And we had quite a group in the room with us.
Yeah.
And we spent 7 hours
around
that, several hours, just worshiping the Lord and declaring resurrection life over our son. And we truly believed that we were going to see the miraculous.
Yeah.
And we did, just not quite in the way we were hoping for in that moment. But it was a sacred time.
Yeah. You get to a place in a situation like this where you realize, like, I have two choices, two very, very clear choices. We can either turn our back on God and walk away permanent, like, done with you, what are you doing? Or we can run into his arms and pound his chest and tell him how we are feeling and what we're trying to process through, and thank the Lord we chose to run to him instead of run away.
Yeah.
And I'm so thankful. It was his miraculous rescue in our lives, because it very clearly became like, what in the world is happening?
Yeah.
And why God? The question you're never supposed to ask. Why is this happening to us? What is going to happen now? And you begin to, like, the reality begins to settle in of like, this is really happening. As the 7 hours progressed, the prayers went out. My dad is a pastor, part of an amazing network, and we had missionaries and people and pastors and friends and family praying for us all over the world that day. The power of prayer was unreal. And I remember, so in the hospital, we were able to stay with him, and he was able to stay with us for 2 days.
Yeah.
And this was before the coddle cots, the cooling cots that they had available now in the hospitals that came after Zeke was born.
Yeah.
But we were able to keep him with us and get his handprints and
just hold him
and take pictures and share his life with our family. One of the things we didn't do is, the girls were so little, we didn't have them see him, but they came into the hospital with us for a little while. Their little hearts and minds were struggling to comprehend what was happening. That was hard. I remember preparing myself to have to tell the girls that he wasn't coming home. And that was hard. You ever cried so hard that you don't have tears left, is where we got. But
I remember just getting, I would sleep with him on the couch, and just the reality, you wake up in the morning and you feel like it's all a dream, and you're quickly reminded that it's not a dream, it's not a nightmare, this is real.
I didn't want any silence, so my phone was Pandora and stayed on all night and all day. Worship music. And I woke up in the middle of the night. I was holding him at that point, and the song Nothing I Hold On To was playing, and I'd never heard it before. And it was very raw, and I woke up to the words, I will climb this mountain with my hands wide open. There's nothing I hold on to. And that song, literally, that's how I feel. I am climbing a mountain and I cannot hold on. I don't have the strength to climb. I can't do this. Lord, you have to show up here. And he did. We had hope.
Yeah.
And it's the most hopeless situation. We still had hope. I don't understand it. It is supernatural. It is miraculous. The power of Jesus in the most dark, hopeless situations.
And we had amazing friends and family during those few days that were very close, and they showed up, and the church, the body of Christ, held us close.
Yeah.
And just the love and the support and the prayers, what kept us going.
Sunday morning, we got home from the hospital. We had to plan the funeral, which was excruciating. I felt forced. I felt angry. I remember the funeral director coming and putting Ezekiel in a car seat. And I was so mad at her because she took my son, and she didn't. But there was another moment of trauma of just like not having him in the room with us anymore, which was the right thing to do and needed to happen at that point. But it just felt so frustrating and angering, and we left the hospital that day and came home, and it was a Saturday. And Sunday morning we got up, and this pastor showed up at our house. Not one from our church, a friend of ours that we love dearly. And he said, "The Lord sent me here. I have to go lead a set of worship at my church." And Michael Kelly showed up at our house, and he said, "The Lord told me to come and to tell you guys to not get stuck with the question why, and to turn your question to what. What, Lord, are you going to do now?"
Yeah.
And we needed that more than we could express. Yeah. And he hugged us, cried with us, and then he went on his way. And that's just what happened so often. People just showed up in the hospital, divine encounters.
Yep.
And we were planning his service, and we refused to do a funeral, nor did we want to call it a funeral, because who wants to have a funeral for your baby? Like, that is awful and not something that you ever want to do. No. But we wanted to have a celebration of his life, and we wanted people to know that there's hope. And so we planned a service that was probably the most powerful church service I've ever been in. And
no doubt.
We had over 300 people in the room. We had worship, and we had a gospel message, and we were able to sing and share our story with his little casket sitting in front of the stage. Just trusting that God was going to bring beauty from ashes, that he was going to carry us, and to testify to that he already was to everyone that loves us and everyone that's been with us.
Believing that resurrection could have been possible.
Yes.
Like even in that moment in that service, believing that if God...
Lazarus was 4 days, right?
Wanted to
he can do anything.
Right.
Yes. And I know people think we're crazy for believing that, but it's true. Well, all it did for us was realize, like, we have a very real enemy that hates us. And God does not take, like, he did not take Ezekiel to teach us something, to teach us a lesson. He doesn't break your arm and then heal it. That's not his nature. His nature is love, compassion, mercy, and kindness. He is for you. And so to transition the thought process that God was trying to teach us something because somehow we were bad and we needed taught a lesson is just absurd. The enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy. But Jesus says, "I have come to give life and life more abundantly." And we truly knew that what we were walking through was not the hand of God. That night, we had over 300 people in the room, and we had no less than 30 people give their lives to Jesus that night. And then through his testimony, I don't even know how many their lives were radically changed. Why? Because we didn't see a miracle like we thought we would. Why were their lives changed? Because God held us together in that moment. There was such a supernatural love of Jesus in us that was like, it's not, we chose him, but he also chose us. I remember leaving the graveyard after we buried him that next day. And I remember saying, "Lord, I'm going to be a bit of a demanding mother right now. I want to see fruit." And he spoke to me in that moment. He said, "Ezekiel is a seed in the ground." And I had a vision, because the Lord talks to me through pictures a lot, of this massive oak tree. And and just that this would not end in death, but in more life than we can understand. And that our son's life, his little 9 months of living, far exceeded our expectations in impacting the world with the kingdom of heaven and our own lives. Even if it's just for us, we are different people in our faith and in our walk with Jesus because of him.
It was beautiful. The impact of his short little life.
Yeah.
That it just touched so many people and changed so many lives and changed our lives, and the fruit of his life.
Yeah. And it proceeded to where I was kind of blogging. I'm not a writer, but we formed this Facebook page to share our story because we realized like quickly that when you experience this kind of loss, it's very isolating, and we wanted to be open about Ezekiel's story and our journey in stillborn death and that loss. And so we started writing on the Ezekiel movement. You can still find it on Facebook, and it was just telling the stories of what God was doing as a result of our surrender and the miracle of this little guy's life. Yeah. And I wanted to keep track of it. I wanted to remember how I felt, the rawness, the awfulness, and the beauty of it all. The story continues to this day. 9 years later, the story and the testimonies and the fruit. It sounds pretty now when we're saying all of this, but it was excruciating, and
it's horrible.
It was awful. And I remember the days after, I started hitting the wall, and Travis grabbed me and he held me, and I just wept. The pain is excruciating. And I can tell you that the Lord was never once condemning of these expressions of grief and lament. I felt so close to the Father in that season and so seen. And I told him exactly, and you told him exactly how you felt. We were not shy. We were not, it was not tailored or pretty. It was very raw. And the Lord can handle your raw emotions. He wants you to share and open your heart to him because he wants to be with you in it and rescue you and heal you. And
we trust him in the mystery.
Yeah.
Because there is mystery. If our walk with Jesus, our relationship with the Lord, there's so much mystery in it. So many things that we can't understand and that we will never understand. But in the mystery, his nature doesn't change. In the mystery, he is still good. In the mystery, he is still working all things together for our good.
Yeah.
And trusting him in that. And
it sounds fluffy, but it's real.
No,
this is like rubber meets road real.
We were in the hospital with Ezekiel, and the doctor is talking with us, and she says, you know, of course, us in that moment, we want our baby, and I kept thinking like I want as fast as we can to have another baby, because that you feel like that is what you need more than anything in that moment, is to be able to hold a baby, and you want to get there as quick as possible. And she looked at us and she said, I would recommend that you don't even begin trying to get pregnant for another 18 months. And for us, that was like a knife in the heart, that we would have to wait another 1.5 years to even begin trying to conceive another baby. And that was a blow. That was hard to hear.
And we both went back and forth, like, we want another baby now. We don't want another baby now. And I remember it was like February, October is when he went to be with Jesus.
It was about 6 months.
And it was afterwards. About 6 months after. And the Lord started to like flip my heart. Like, do you trust me?
Right.
And would you, walk this journey with me? And I started wanting to have another baby. And I had 2 C-sections in 2 years' time. Again, just not recommended. But I remember laying in bed one night and looking at him and saying, like, this is what the Lord's speaking to me. And what are you thinking? And he said, he's saying the same thing to me. And both of us were just like, we're going to trust him. We've trusted him this far. Yeah. And we got pregnant that week. We counted back the calendar, and it would have been that week that we conceived. Yeah. And we found out a few months later that our little Eliza May, our rainbow baby, was coming into our family.
It was a girl.
A girl, and
Yep.
we were so excited.
Another girl.
We were so excited, and like that year after Zeke passed, it was the grief, I had to learn how to deal with panic attacks, to learn how to tell myself the truth in the middle of those moments, to hold on all the way. Like, there was no time in the pregnancy where we were like, we made it this far, we're good. Like, we're good.
No.
There was no time where we could just, what felt like we could just sit back and relax.
Yeah, that was probably the most excruciating 9 months of my life, was just the waiting. Pregnancy is not a fast process.
Yeah.
And the waiting, and even up to her delivery, again, another, scheduled C-section. And I remember sitting in the room waiting, and just Leslie was connected to all the monitors so we could see the heartbeat and all the vitals, and everything looked good. But I remember standing there ready to have our baby girl, and I could not stop staring at the monitor, at her heart rate, because anything could happen. And we knew God had promised us that we were going to have our Eliza May, and he was so very clear, so many prophetic confirmations over this pregnancy, and he was so faithful. And we had our Eliza. She was perfect.
We caught her our little ball of peace.
Yeah.
And like her delivery, I had 2 C-sections prior that, because of trauma, I had no memory of Zeke's birth. And I'm thankful for that. And then with Brielle's, I was asleep. So this was like having my 3rd C-section for like the very first time. And honestly, I'm glad that it was that way, because I don't know that I would have chosen to do it again and again.
Right.
But the peace that was in the room when she was born, it was life-changing. Yeah. The miracle of her life, and the promises of all 3 of our girls, and the beauty that they are, and the journey of having all of them is just, there's nothing that compares. We are very blessed, and for the realities of the 3 beautiful girls that we have, and our beautiful son in heaven. Yeah. Our story is one that we feel like the Lord has shaped and formed through what the enemy meant to destroy us with. We want to have this conversation to help normalize speaking into, about, and celebrating the lives of our children, from conception to however long they are in our arms. We want you to feel seen and loved by the one that knows the pain and the suffering that you're walking through. And also, if you have never walked through this, just to experience God's love and his resurrection power through our testimony.